China says it opposes all forms of violence. This is after a classical Chinese dance group was named in a threat, which led to the Prime Minister being evacuated from his Canberra home. SBS reported that a threat to Anthony Albanese said a bomb would be detonated at the lodge if performances of Shen Yun were allowed to continue. The classical dance troupe was founded by religious movement Falun Gong, which is banned in China. A Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson has accused the dance group of being a political tool used by Falun Gong.
China has consistently opposed all forms of violent attacks. It must be pointed out that the so-called Shen Yun performance is by no means a normal cultural activity, but rather a political tool used by the Falun Gong to spread cult information and amass wealth.
Joining me live now is Sky News host Chung Lei. Chung, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Can you just explain Shen Yun, Falun Gong, and how the Chinese government has really tried to suppress these protests? And I think many Sydney-siders, people in Melbourne on the East Coast in particular, probably right around Australia, have seen some of these silent protests from that movement.
That's right. I've been observing this for over 20 years because since the 90s, when they really hit a peak in terms of influence in China, even some senior Chinese political leaders were involved in this because it started out as a holistic health practice. So it quickly gained a lot of followers. And then there began more sort of, I guess some would call brainwashing, some would say indoctrination, but China has basically branded it an evil cult. And in fact, the opposition or the repression was very, very tough on them 20 years ago, 25 years ago. But then since then, they have just done their own thing, for example, protesting outside the consulates, the embassies in major cities around the world. They have a newspaper, the Epoch Times, and they have had their own share of bad press. But when you think about who would gain from doing such a thing, that is threatening this dance troupe, you know, you've got to rule out a few things. For example, can it be the CCP? Well, that would be totally against their mode of operation, which is to do things under the table, and that's just would be so own goal. I would rule it out. Can it be Falun Gong itself? It's a PR stunt trying to draw people's attention to these concerts to seem like victims. That would be highly risky, but you can't completely rule it out. But I mean, I'm sure the AFP is on it already investigating the origin of these threats. And then you have the crazy pinks. So these are usually young people who have so, you know, taken the Kool-Aid by the CCP that they really, really rabidly oppose anything that is anti-CCP, which Shen Yun / Falun Gong definitely is. So there's a possibility there is someone a bit on the fringe who wants to make people know that there is such an anti-CCP performance troupe going on, but not realising that's just going to draw more attention to them. And then finally, you could have any of a number of dissident groups outside China that want to highlight the issue of transnational repression and monitoring. And of that, we can be absolutely sure there is. It exists and it is very, very well funded. I've translated, you know, thousands of pages of phone transcripts between a former Chinese secret police spy and his supervisor in China about how to, get this, surveil a Falun Gong practitioner in Bangkok under the guise of being a business person, you know, staking out their apartment, taking photos of the family, etc. It's all quite sinister. And it is happening, and I'm pretty sure it's happening in Australia. So while this threat itself may be a stunt, maybe just a, you know, it draws a lot of attention, it's an attention-getting move, but then the deeper issue is transnational repression and what China really would do to shut down anyone that has influence in the diaspora and in influencing people in politics.
Lay, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because as you and I just noted, we've seen these Falun Gong protests. They're peaceful, they're often silent protests for the better part of 20 years. From what you know, how worried is China about this presence of Falun Gong that has been ongoing for so many years? Is there a calculation that they want to completely suppress their voices internationally? Is there a frustration that they can't?
Well, they certainly want to undermine their credibility. And there are attempts to try to infiltrate the organisation. And, of course, the official repression stopped a long time ago because it saw Falun Gong as less of a threat than, say, the Uyghurs. Used to be the Tibetans as well, then the Uyghurs, and now the Hong Kongers. So, and maybe in the future, the Taiwanese. So it's, I guess, it's quite telling about how insecure they are in their own governance and what they've done, that they would be afraid or be keen to control these groups that we don't really see as, you know, given China's might and economic prowess, should be afraid of.
What do you make of China's official response to this, but also Anthony Albanese? We know he wants to turn down the heat when it comes to division in other areas, but shouldn't he be turning it up in terms of the perceived intimidation of Falun Gong in this country that's clearly happening here?
I think our government, our leaders, our politicians are afraid of calling China out because China is so powerful. It's not afraid to use economic coercion, even at the expense of hurting itself and its own people. It's so easily offended, and under Xi, it's just got more paranoid and insecure. So it is very hard to predict an exact response, but it's highly likely that it would be very damaging. And so, you know, the communication sometimes can seem very timid. And I wish we had more people, not just me, so that I'm in a privileged position because I've lost everything. I can't go to China. And my friends here who are not afraid, Chinese Australian friends who are not afraid to be my friend, are usually those who have lost everything as well. And it's quite sad that you have to get to that point before you can.
Friendly.
Oh, yes. People who take themselves out of the room when there's a group photo, or say, oh, I can't come to dinner because I'm going to China soon, or just, you know, meet me and then never correspond again. And I am sad because if a system can do that to its own people when they're in a free country, imagine what they're doing to people under their thumbs.
How do you reconcile with that? Do you accept that it's a real threat, that people are intimidated and that they should take precaution? I mean, after what happened to me, I can't say to people, I know where the red lines are and what to be careful of to stay out of jail, but I can use my position and that of my fellow, you know, persecuted by China friends' voices, and we can speak up. And it doesn't have to be a China-bashing rant. It doesn't have to be a absolutist, stop trade with China now, even if it hurts our own employment kind of message. All it is saying this is what's happening in China. For example, last week I had 2 Chinese Australians tell me about their horrible 6-year ordeal after being scammed out of 15 million yuan by a Chinese very lowly ranking military official who had a photo with Xi Jinping and therefore was able to get, you know, their court order suppressed to just get away with stealing the money. And they had to sleep outside the Petitions Bureau in Beijing 24 nights in a row and see people freeze to death and jump to their deaths from trees in order to have the officials in their hometowns punished. So this sad man jumped from a tree,
because a tall tree, because he said there's a rule that if somebody commits suicide in the Petitions Bureau in Beijing, then the local government official will be held accountable. So he was using his life to make a message. And we can do that on TV, in print, on social media. And I will use that freedom whenever I can.
It's great to talk to you. Great to see your face.
Thank you so much, Laura.